I never imagined the day I'd sit across from my stepmother in a lawyer's office, the air so thick you could cut it with a knife. My name is Emilia Carter. I'm 31 years old, the owner of a tiny cafe in Seattle, and for the last 13 years I've lived my life far away from the cold marble halls of my father's mansion. We hadn't spoken much before he passed. Not because I didn't love him, but because someone else made sure there was no room for me in his world. Vanessa, my stepmother, the woman who wore diamonds like armor and spoke to me as if I were a stain she couldn't scrub out. Now here she was, smiling smugly, certain she knew exactly how the reading of my father's deprivee 154 million will would go. I thought I did too, until the lawyer turned the page and smiled. Before Vanessa, before the bitterness and closed doors, there was sunshine. I grew up in Portland, Oregon, in a house that always smelled faintly of my mother's lavender hand cream. My father, Richard Carter, was a tall, commanding man, but at home he was simply dad, warm, playful, and unafraid to make a fool of himself just to hear me laugh. My mother, Claire, was his opposite in every way, gentle, soft-spoken, and endlessly patient. We weren't rich back then, not in the way people think of wealth. My father owned a mid-sized construction company and worked long hours, but our lives were comfortable. Weekends meant pancakes in the kitchen, my father in an old flannel shirt and my mother humming as she watered the roses outside. I remember the way she looked at me like I was the best thing she had ever done. When I was 9, everything shattered. It was late autumn, the kind of crisp day where the air stings your cheeks. My father was out of town on business, so my mother picked me up from school. She'd promised we could stop for hot chocolate before heading home. We were crossing a quiet intersection when a delivery truck, ignoring the red light, barreled toward us. I still remember the screech of tires, my mother's sharp gasp, and the sudden crushing impact. The next thing I knew, I was on the pavement, my leg throbbing, my ears ringing. My mother wasn't moving. Her hand, which had been holding mine just seconds earlier, now lay limp on the cold asphalt. I don't remember screaming, but people told me later I wouldn't stop calling her name. She died before the ambulance reached the hospital. I spent weeks in a fog, shuttled between relatives, while my father buried himself in work. He tried to be strong, but I could see the cracks the way his voice caught when he said her name. The hollow look in his eyes when he came home to an empty bed. For a while it felt like we might heal. My father and I had each other after all. We'd eat dinner together in silence sometimes, holding hands across the table. On weekends, we'd visit her grave, bringing fresh roses even when snow covered the ground. But grief is a strange thing. It can bind two people together or slowly pull them apart. My father began taking more business trips, staying away longer each time. I told myself it was just work, that he was coping in his own way. But deep down, I sensed that something was shifting. I didn't know then that the woman who would change everything for me was already moving into his orbit. That one day the warmth of my mother's lavender-scented home would be replaced by cold marble floors and the clink of champagne glasses, and that the distance between my father and me was only just beginning. I was 11 when my father first mentioned her. He'd come home from a business trip looking lighter. There was a new spring in his step, the kind I hadn't seen since before the accident. Over dinner, he casually said he'd met someone special. I remember staring at him, fork frozen halfway to my mouth, unsure how to respond. I wanted to be happy for him, but some instinct in me whispered caution. Her name was Vanessa Price. She was a real estate agent, younger than my father by nearly 20 years, with glossy chestnut hair and a smile that seemed more rehearsed than genuine. Our first meeting was at a downtown steakhouse. She wore a diamond necklace that caught the light with every movement and perfume so strong it clung to my clothes for hours afterward. At first, she was polite, too polite. Her questions about school and hobbies felt like items she was ticking off a list. She laughed at my father's jokes a little too loudly, touched his arm a little too often. I was too young to put words to it then, but now I know she was performing. Not for me, for him. 3 months later, my father announced they were getting married. From the moment Vanessa moved into our house, it stopped feeling like home. She had the living room repainted in stark white, replacing my mother's rose-patterned curtains with heavy silk drapes in a deep burgundy. Family photos disappeared from the hallway, replaced by abstract art in gold frames. The scent of lavender that used to float through the air was replaced by Vanessa's sharp, musky perfume. It wasn't just the house that changed. My father changed too. He started dressing differently, talking about networking and social appearances. He and Vanessa hosted parties almost every weekend, events filled with people I didn't know, drinking champagne and talking about property investments. I was expected to make brief appearances, smile for a few photos, and then disappear upstairs. Then came Lucas and Sophie. Lucas was born when I was 13. Sophie 2 years later. My father was overjoyed, but I could see where his attention went. Every milestone. Lucas's first steps. Sophie's first words was celebrated like a royal event. I was still his daughter, but no longer his priority. Vanessa didn't hide how she felt about me. "You really should try to be more like Sophie," she told me once when I was 16, after I'd come home from school still wearing my old hoodie. "She's only 2, and already loves wearing nice clothes." Another time when I forgot to rinse a glass in the sink, she sighed dramatically and said, "Your father works too hard to support a young woman who can't even handle basic chores." The comments were always small enough to dismiss individually, but constant enough to wear me down. I learned to avoid her whenever possible, staying in my room with the door locked or studying at the library until late at night. My father noticed my distance but never confronted it. Sometimes I'd catch him looking at me like he wanted to say something, but Vanessa would sweep into the room and the moment would pass. By the time I turned 18, I knew I couldn't stay. The house I'd grown up in had become a stage for Vanessa's performances, a place where I felt more like a guest than family. So I packed my bags, hugged my father briefly in the foyer, and walked out without looking back. I didn't know then how long it would be before I'd set foot in that house again, or that the next time I did it would be to say goodbye. The first night I spent away from my father's house, I slept in a tiny studio apartment above a laundromat in San Francisco. The walls were thin, the radiator groaned all night, and the smell of detergent drifted up through the vents, but it was mine. No silk curtains, no cold stairs, no Vanessa. I was 18, a freshman at the University of San Francisco, majoring in business administration. I'd chosen the city partly for its energy and partly because it was far enough away to make surprise visits from my father unlikely. Money was tight. My scholarship covered tuition, but rent, food, and books were on me. I worked 2 part-time jobs, mornings at a bakery, evenings bussing tables at a small Italian restaurant. My hands were always chapped from washing dishes and my feet ached from standing, but the exhaustion felt different from the kind I'd known at home. This was exhaustion I chose. Some nights I'd lie in bed listening to the streetcars outside, wondering what my father was doing. Was he thinking about me at all? Did he notice how little we spoke? Every few months, I'd get a short call from him. Usually when Vanessa was out, or otherwise occupied, he'd ask about school, my health, if I was eating enough. The calls never lasted long. I could hear the guilt in his voice, but I didn't know how to bridge the distance between us. After graduation, I decided against taking a corporate job. I'd spent years working in cafes and restaurants, and I loved the rhythm of it, the hiss of the espresso machine, the smell of fresh bread, the quiet moments before the morning rush. So I used my small savings combined with a modest loan to open my own cafe in Seattle. It was nothing glamorous. 10 tables, mismatched chairs, and a chalkboard menu I wrote by hand every morning. I called it Lavender Steam, in honor of my mother. Every corner had a touch of her small potted lavender plants by the windows, framed photographs of fields in bloom, soft music that reminded me of the songs she used to hum. The early months were brutal. Some days, only a handful of customers walked in. I'd stand behind the counter, forcing a smile while anxiety noted at me. Rent was due, bills piled up, and I couldn't afford a single mistake. But slowly, regulars started coming back. A young writer who always ordered a latte and sat in the same corner. An elderly couple who held hands over tea. A group of nurses from the nearby clinic who stopped by after their shifts. In those quiet, steady days, I started to believe I might actually make it. I still thought about my father, but less often. I didn't expect help from him. And Vanessa, she was a ghost, distant but still a shadow in my mind. Then, one cold February morning, the phone rang while I was refilling the pastry case. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, clipped and formal. "Is this Emilia Carter?" "Yes," I said cautiously. "This is Mr. Daniels, your father's personal assistant. I'm calling to inform you your father has been admitted to the hospital. It's serious." My heart stopped. He gave no more details, only the name of the hospital in Portland. My hands shook as I locked up the cafe and bought the first ticket I could find. It had been 13 years since I'd walked through the doors of my father's house, and I had no idea what I was walking into. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and burnt coffee. My boots clicked against the polished floor as I made my way to the room number Mr. Daniels had given me. I expected to see my father first. Instead, the doorway was blocked by Vanessa. She hadn't changed much, still impeccably dressed, still wearing a smile that didn't touch her eyes. Her hair was swept into a sleek bun, a silk scarf knotted neatly around her neck. "What are you doing here, Emilia?" she asked, her voice low but edged with disdain. "I'm here to see my father," I said. Her gaze swept over me, pausing on my thrift store coat and scuffed boots. "He's resting. You don't need to be here." I stepped past her without asking permission. My father was lying in the hospital bed, his skin pale, his frame shrunken. Tubes and wires surrounded him, the soft beep of the monitor marking each fragile heartbeat. But when he saw me, his eyes lit up. "Emilia," he rasped, his voice weaker than I'd ever heard it. I sat down beside him, taking his hand. His fingers felt cold, but his grip still carried a trace of strength. For a moment, neither of us spoke. "I've missed you," I finally said. He closed his eyes briefly, like the words hurt and healed at the same time. "I've missed you too. I should have called more. I should have." He stopped, his voice breaking. "It doesn't matter now," I whispered, though deep down I knew it did. Vanessa lingered in the doorway, arms crossed, impatient. I ignored her. My father took a shaky breath. "Emilia, I don't know how much time I have. I can't change the past, but I can make sure you're taken care of. I've made arrangements. You'll understand when the time comes." "What arrangements?" I asked. But he only shook his head, the ghost of a smile on his lips. "Trust me," he said simply. The nurse came in, checking his IV, and Vanessa swept into the room, clucking about how he needed rest. She'd ordered me to leave, but I stayed until the nurse gently suggested it was best to let him sleep. Back in the hallway, Vanessa leaned in close. "Don't think showing up now makes you part of this family again," she hissed. "When the will is read, you'll see exactly where you stand." I didn't respond. Part of me wanted to lash out, to tell her I didn't care about the will or the money. But another part of me, a quieter, more patient part, decided to wait. 2 weeks later, my father passed away. The call came early in the morning from a number I didn't recognize. It was Vanessa. "Richard's gone," she said flatly. "The funeral is Saturday. You can come if you stay out of the way." Her tone was ice, but I agreed. Not for her. For him, and for the unanswered question that had taken root in my chest. What arrangements had he made? The funeral was held on a gray Saturday morning, the kind where the clouds hung low enough to feel like they might brush your shoulders. The Carter family plot sat on a quiet hill overlooking Portland, lined with tall cedars that swayed in the wind. I stood at the back, away from the cluster of black-clad mourners surrounding the casket. Vanessa was at the front, draped in an elegant black coat, a wide-brimmed hat shielding her face. Lucas and Sophie stood beside her, both dressed sharply, their expressions carefully composed for the crowd. Not once did she look in my direction. When the pastor finished speaking and the casket was lowered, the guests drifted toward their cars. I stayed put, waiting until most had gone. I wanted a moment alone with my father, without the cold wall of Vanessa's presence between us, but she found me first. I heard her heels crunch on the gravel before I saw her. She stopped a few feet away, her lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You can save yourself the trouble of hoping," she said softly, as if delivering a kindness. "You won't be getting anything from your father's will." I stared at her, stunned by the bluntness. She took a step closer, lowering her voice until it was just for me. My stepmother told me I would not get anything from my dad's 154 million will. She sat there all happy during the reading of the will. But then the lawyer read one sentence, and he smiled. Except the reading hadn't happened yet. This was her prelude, her power move. Lucas and Sophie are his real family now. She added, her eyes glittering. You were just a reminder of a past he wanted to forget. My fingers curled into fists at my sides. That's not true, I said quietly. Believe what you want, she said, turning away. The lawyer's office is Monday at 10:00. Wear something appropriate. She walked off, her children trailing behind her like shadows. When they were gone, I approached the fresh grave. The stone was simple, engraved with his name, birth, and death dates. My hand trembled as I brushed away a stray cedar needle from its surface. I don't care about the money, I whispered. I just wish we'd had more time. The wind carried the scent of damp earth and pine. I stayed until the cemetery was empty, my coat pulled tight around me before finally walking back to my car. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying his words in the hospital. I've made arrangements. You'll understand when the time comes. Vanessa thought she had already won. Maybe she was right. Maybe Monday would strip away whatever hope I had left. But something in me, something stubborn and unyielding, refused to believe my father would leave me with nothing. I didn't know what was coming, only that I had to be there to hear it for myself. The lawyer's office was in an old brick building downtown, the kind with frosted glass doors and the faint smell of paper and polished wood. I arrived 10 minutes early, dressed in my best black dress and the only pair of heels I owned. My palms were damp, and I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. The receptionist gave me a polite nod before pointing to a conference room down the hall. When I stepped inside, all conversation stopped. Vanessa sat at the head of the long mahogany table, perfectly poised in a tailored black suit. Her lips curved into a smug smile the moment our eyes met. On either side of her were Lucas and Sophie, Lucas lounging in his chair like he owned the place, Sophie scrolling through her phone without looking up. And then there was a man I didn't recognize, tall, with slicked back hair and a designer watch that caught the light. Vanessa leaned toward him, whispering something that made them both smirk. That's, Mark Lucas said, noticing my glance, Mom's brother. He's here to make sure everything goes smoothly. Smoothly, I repeated, taking the empty seat furthest from Vanessa. The air in the room felt heavy, charged with the unspoken assumption that I was about to be erased from whatever my father had left behind. Vanessa's eyes never left me, her expression radiating the confidence of someone who believed she'd already won. A side door opened and Mr. Harris, my father's longtime attorney, entered. He was a stocky man in his 60s with kind eyes that flicked briefly toward me before settling on his notes. "Good morning," he said, taking his seat at the head of the table. "We're here to read the last will and testament of Richard Carter." Vanessa sat straighter, crossing one leg over the other. "Let's get on with it, shall we?" she said as if she were in charge. Mr. Harris opened a thick folder, the sound of paper crisp in the silence. "As per Mr. Carter's wishes, I will read this in full. Please hold any comments until the end." I clasped my hands in my lap to hide the way they were trembling. He began to read, his voice steady. "I, Richard Carter, being of sound mind and body, hereby leave the entirety of my estate, including any real property, liquid assets, and personal belongings to my wife, Vanessa Carter, and our children, Lucas Carter and Sophie Carter." Vanessa's smile widened. Lucas leaned back in his chair, arms crossed like a victor surveying the battlefield. Sophie glanced at me, her smirk almost daring me to react. I didn't move. Mr. Harris continued, his tone unchanged. "The remainder of my possessions shall be distributed according to my separate instructions filed herewith." For a fraction of a second, I thought I saw the corners of his mouth twitch, not in nervousness, but in something almost like amusement. Vanessa caught it too, and her smile faltered. I didn't know it then, but that single moment, the brief curve of the lawyer's lips was the crack in the facade, the part where everything began to shift. Mr. Harris cleared his throat, shuffling the papers as if he were deciding whether to proceed. "As stated," he continued, The will leaves the estate as filed here to Mrs. Vanessa Carter and her children. That estate consists of... He glanced down at the list in front of him, a cabin property in rural Montana, and a 2001 pickup truck. The room went dead silent. Vanessa blinked. "Excuse me, the cabin is in fair condition," Mr. Harris went on, his tone maddeningly calm. "The truck runs, though it will require some maintenance." Lucas sat up straighter. "That's it. That's all. That's all listed in the will," Mr. Harris confirmed. Vanessa's face flushed in angry crimson. "Where are the rest of the assets? The accounts, the company shares, the properties?" "My husband was worth $154 million, Mark cut in, his voice sharp. "So where is it?" I sat back in my chair saying nothing. My pulse was racing, but not from panic. I'd seen the flicker in Mr. Harris's expression earlier. Something was coming. Mr. Harris removed a second folder from his briefcase. 3 years ago, Mr. Carter created an irrevocable trust. The contents of that trust are not part of the probate process and therefore not included in this will. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. And Mr. Harris said, opening the folder, "He transferred into that trust all company shares of Carter Construction. His investment portfolio, the main residence in Portland, the beach house in Cannon Beach, the Montana ranch, excluding the aforementioned cabin, the yacht, and all associated accounts and assets." Sophie frowned. "So who gets that stuff?" Mr. Harris looked up, and for the first time, he smiled. "The sole beneficiary of the trust is Emilia Carter." The words landed like a thunderclap. Vanessa gripped the edge of the table. "No," she said, her voice shaking. "No, that's impossible. He would never. It's all documented." Mr. Harris said, sliding copies of the trust agreement across the table. "My father's signature, bold and unmistakable, was on every page." Lucas slammed his hand on the table. "You manipulated him, didn't you?" He spat at me. "You came crawling back at the end, pretending to care." "I hadn't spoken to him in 13 years, I said quietly. "I didn't even know about this until now. That's a lie." Vanessa's voice was high, almost shrill. "You don't deserve any of it. I was his wife. I took care of him." Mr. Harris's tone didn't change. Mr. Carter made his decision well before his illness. His instructions were clear. Emilia alone was to inherit the trust. He said she understood the value of his work and would protect the legacy he built. The room erupted. Lucas muttered curses under his breath. Sophie started to cry, and Mark accused Mr. Harris of hiding assets and threatened legal action. Vanessa just sat there staring at the documents as if they might rearrange themselves if she glared hard enough. I didn't gloat. There was no satisfaction in watching their faces crumble. Only a strange mixture of sadness and relief. Sadness for all the years lost. Relief that my father had in his own way remembered me. Vanessa finally rose from her chair, her movements stiff. "This isn't over," she hissed. "I'll fight this in court. You're welcome to try, Mr. Harris replied, his smile polite but unyielding. "But the trust is airtight." She swept out of the room, her heels striking the floor in sharp, angry bursts. Lucas and Sophie followed Mark, lingering just long enough to glare at me before storming after them. Suddenly, the conference room felt enormous and empty. Mr. Harris gathered the papers and slid them toward me. "It's a lot to take in," he said gently, "but he wanted you to have the means to do something meaningful with no strings attached." I ran my fingers over the edge of the documents, my throat tightening. He really thought I could handle all this." Mr. Harris nodded. "He told me once, she's the only one who understands what it cost me to build all this. She's the only one who will protect it." For a long moment I couldn't speak. The image of my father in the hospital bed came back to me, the way his hand had squeezed mine. The faint smile when he said, "Trust me." I finally stood, tucking the folder under my arm. "Thank you," I said, my voice low but steady. As I left the office, the winter sunlight spilled across the street, cold but bright. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. The first thing I did after the will reading was drive straight to Lavender Steam. My cafe had been my world for years. My sanctuary. My proof that I could build something on my own. I unlocked the door, flipped the sign to open, and let the familiar smell of coffee and lavender wrap around me. The regulars came in one by one, greeting me with the easy warmth that had nothing to do with money or inheritance. But now, everything had changed. Over the next few weeks, I met with Mr. Harris countless times, going over the details of my father's trust. There were properties to manage, investments to understand, and employees at Carter Construction who looked to me for leadership. It was overwhelming at first, like being handed the keys to a city I didn't yet know how to navigate. Still, I approached it the only way I knew how, one step at a time. I kept the cafe open not just because it was profitable, but because it kept me grounded. Every morning, I still brewed coffee, wiped down tables, and listened to people's stories. One afternoon, I visited my father's old office. It was exactly as he'd left it: polished, desk-framed blueprints, a faint scent of cedar from the bookshelves. In the top drawer, I found a sealed envelope with my name on it. Inside was a single note in his handwriting. Emilia, I wish I had been braver sooner. I can't give you back the years we lost, but I can give you the tools to build the future you deserve. Trust yourself. I always did. I read it twice, my vision blurring. Then I placed it back in the drawer, knowing it belonged there. Vanessa never contacted me again. I heard rumors that she sold the cabin and moved out of state, but I didn't care to confirm them. As for me, I carried my father's legacy forward, not as a prize I'd won, but as a responsibility I'd chosen. And every time I unlocked the cafe door in the morning, I whispered the same words he'd once told me. Trust me.